We're glad you're all here this morning, and we hope that you've been challenged and stimulated by the conference, Bottoms-Up Approaches to Global Poverty. I know there's a lot of interesting topics, and this morning is no exception. The schedule has changed a little bit, and if you haven't checked it recently, this is not what was originally scheduled here this morning. But this morning we have a distinguished speaker, and I'm privileged to introduce this morning our speaker, Dr. Bernard Amadei, and he's going to speak on the topic you see here, Engineering with Soul. Dr. Amadei is a professor of civil engineering at the University of Colorado at Boulder, where he directs an innovative program entitled Engineering for Developing Communities. He's earned his Master of Science in Civil Engineering from the University of Toronto and his PhD in Civil Engineering from the University of California, Berkeley. Now, Dr. Amadei is an accomplished professional who's authored 2 books and has over 150 technical papers. His current interests include sustainability, green construction, and international development. The work Dr. Amadei is accomplishing is truly interdisciplinary and international. I am a mechanical engineer by profession, and I first learned about Dr. Amadei and his exploits through my professional society, believe it or not. He has been instrumental and founded the Engineers Without Borders, which I think has had a huge impact on the engineering profession and showing people where they can make a difference. To illustrate the respect that Dr. Amadei has from his colleagues, he was recently elected to the prestigious U.S. National Academy of Engineering. That's quite a high honor. Dr. Amadei has a personal goal to promote sustainable development, appropriate technology, service learning, and system thinking in the curriculum and research of civil and environmental engineering programs. And he's also going to stimulate us this morning. This morning, he's working on a book that's entitled Engineering with Soul, and we're going to hear a little bit about that this morning. So without further, Dr. Amadei.
Thank you, Ken. It's indeed a great pleasure to be here today, and again, thank you for inviting me to speak at your conference. My lecture this morning is going to be about engineering, but different kind of engineering that you are used to. Don't worry, I'm not going to bombard you with equations or anything like that. Rather, I'm going to bombard you with a lot of compassion, and I'm going to bombard you with a lot of compassion in action, and that's what essentially Engineers Without Borders is all about. I'm going to tell you about my own story, essentially, how I studied Engineers Without Borders several years ago, and the need for organizations such as Engineers Without Borders in trying to reach out to those 5 billion people on the planet whose job is really to try to stay alive by the end of the day. People like you and me who need water, who need sanitation, who need shelter, who need energy, who have been deprived of any dignity whatsoever. And I will show you a bunch of pictures of projects where we met people who do not have the basic things that you and I essentially take for granted. The kind of engineering that I'm going to talk about today is really small scale, but with a big heart, with a lot of compassion behind it. It's an engineering with a human face. It's an engineering with heart. It's an engineering that essentially cares for the people who receive these the technical solutions. The engineering profession is very important in helping the world. If you look at the Western world, over the past 100 years, the engineering profession has, along with the medical profession, has increased life expectancy. In most modern countries, life expectancy is high. Here in the United States, it's 77. In Japan, it's 83. It's the highest life expectancy. But if you look at in many countries in the world, and I'm doing a lot of work in Afghanistan right now, life expectancy is about 40, 50 at the most. And so the challenge that I see for the engineering profession is really to improve the life of those, again, 5 billion people whose job is to try to stay alive by the end of the day. A message that I'm going to convey during my presentation is that for us it is no longer an option to address the needs of the poor. It is an obligation. An obligation at different levels, a spiritual obligation, a material obligation. We are dealing here with brothers and sisters who, like us, are children of the divine who are calling for our help. And we need to do it together. Beyond religion, beyond political system, beyond economic system. We need to do it together. And I will show you several large initiatives that, especially in the Middle East, that I'm working on right now, that involve 3 different religions with a common goal, which is to bring peace to the region. So how did it start for me? It started in a small village in Belize, by accident or not. I don't believe it was an accident, but it's a long story, but essentially in a nutshell, in 2000, I ended up in a small village in Belize. I was invited by the Ministry of Agriculture there to look at Mayan villages. They wanted me to help them put together a vocational training place for poor Mayan Indians. I agreed to that, and so I visited those villages. And I came across this little village there of San Pablo, Belize, and 250 people living there in the middle of the jungle, making less than $1 a day, living under really poor conditions. And what really changed my life is meeting that little girl on the slide there. That little girl, her job was to carry water from the river to the village nonstop. As a result, she could not go to school. That was how it was presented to me. And I say, oh, no problem, I'm an engineer. And they say, hey, you're a civil engineer, plus you have a PhD, it's even better. I told them, well, wait a minute about that one. But I'm a civil engineer, so I should be able to design a pump, essentially, and pump the water from the river to the village. As I came back, I quickly realized that, hey, wait a minute here, I'm in the middle of the jungle, there's no electricity in the middle of the jungle. This is a community that makes less than $1 a day. How are they going to put it together if I bring a Honda type of pump with gasoline or fuel? They won't be able to afford it. So a small problem became a big problem. The implementation part, I had to scratch my head there and I say, hey, wait a minute here. I can do big engineering. My field of engineering is geotechnical engineering, and most of my career I spent on designing large dams, large tunnels, large bridges, larger the better. For us engineers, it has to be big, And for the first time in my life, I was confronted with the fact of doing small-scale type of engineering. So it was a challenge. I had to go back to the drawing board and say, how do I do small-scale kind of engineering? Who is doing that kind of work? And I realized that very few people were doing that kind of work, yet we have a market of 5 billion people. If you look at it, and I think Paul Pollack will talk about it tonight, we have been practicing engineering for a very small number of people on this planet. What about the 5 billion people out there? Do we practice the same kind of engineering for them as we have practiced for the Western world? Absolutely not. It will be a real disaster. So therefore, what kind of engineering are we talking about? So that's essentially the essence of my presentation. This new type of engineering needs to be reinvented. And soul is part of the equation. Compassion is part of the equation. You cannot reinvent engineering for the developing world if you do not bring the soul into the equation. If you do not bring compassion into the equation, if you don't bring the divine into the equation. Yes, I was saying I was not going to not talk about equations. Here's an equation. It's a virtual equation. It's a qualitative equation, but it's an equation anyway. You need to bring yourself, you need to bring your heart, you need to bring compassion, you need to bring peace into this kind of engineering. And believe me, there are not too many books that have been written on that type of engineering. So that's the kind of engineering that I do on a daily basis. When I came back from Belize, I talked to some students. Students were all excited. I'd never seen so many students excited in my life. In 2000, all of a sudden, I had 2, 5, 10, 12 students, 20 students came to my doorstep and say, hey, what's going on here? I usually don't get that kind of excitement when I teach statics or dynamics or strengths of materials. Am I doing something right here? Yes. Well, they told me, this kind of engineering is meaningful. That's the kind of engineering that we have been waiting for. It's meaningful. It makes sense. We are sick and tired of doing problems 5.1 to 5.10 at the end of chapter 5. And I told them I don't blame you because I'm sick and tired of grading them. And everybody was, so it was a win-win for everybody. So a year later, we went back and we put together this water distribution system for about $12,000. And that included the airfares for about 10 people. And out of it came essentially 2 things. Out of it came Engineers Without Borders USA. And I will talk about it in a few minutes. And also out of it came engineering for this program at the University of Colorado. Very quickly, I realized that you cannot bring students to the field and say, hey, let's design a water distribution system. Hey, let's design a photovoltaic system. You need to train people. It is engineering. And I'm very often concerned when people do volunteer work and don't have any technical expertise, it turns out very bad. So the kind of engineering that I'm talking here is engineering that has to be stamped by a professional engineers. It is good engineering. It's the kind of engineering that uses the same principles as any kind of engineering that we teach essentially in engineering schools. But the implementation is different. How you do small-scale engineering at the middle of the jungle, believe me, is different from doing big-scale engineering on Interstate 35. Completely different. And that's where the challenge is. How do you scale down things? How do you make things simple? How do you make things that people can understand? And I will talk about appropriate technology in a few minutes. And that's where the greatest challenge is. It's more to undo rather than undo. So we do too much, especially in a Western kind of world. So we started this program, the Engineering for Developing Communities. We have a track, undergraduate track in the Civil Engineering Department, and we also have a graduate track in 2 programs, one in environmental engineering and one in civil systems, where students can essentially declare a major, or if you want an emphasis, on essentially the developing world. This semester, for instance, I teach a class on sustainable community development. It's a 2-semester-long class, and I co-teach it with a medical doctor. The first semester is about health issues in a developing world. The second semester deals with more business issues and engineering issues. Those 3 components, business, health, and engineering, cannot be separated. This kind of engineering that I'm talking about is an integrated type of engineering. It's an engineering where you need healthy people. You can ask people to dig a trench if they're not healthy. You cannot develop social entrepreneurship if people are not healthy or do not have the technology. It's a triangle. At the three parts of the triangle, you have health, business, and technology or engineering. The 3 work together. You cannot have one without the other. Therefore, it makes this kind of engineering even more complex because it calls on other disciplines that are not traditionally taught in engineering. So when you develop a new program like this one, you need to go beyond your sandbox, beyond essentially engineering. It is engineering in a greater way there that involves health and technical and business issues. So this program here has been very successful, and it's really growing at the University of Colorado. And young people are really interested in it. Half of our students are women. Hey, unheard of. In engineering, how many women go to engineering? It's sad to say that at the University of Colorado it's around 13%. But here all of a sudden we have a program where half of our members are women. In fact, Engineers Without Borders USA has 13,000 members. Half of them are women. That's a good way of recruiting women in engineering. And you ask yourself why? Why is it that women are interested in this kind of engineering? Well, you know, the traditional way of doing engineering doesn't work anymore for women. Traditional way of engineering, the way I was taught, and the way I taught some of my students, was if brute force does not work, try harder. Whoa! How are you going to attract women in engineering with that kind of slogan? Macho type of engineering. Let's control nature, you know. That's the core of engineers. We are strong, you know. It's core of engineers that possible we can do it today. The impossible takes a little bit longer. Okay. Sounds good in the 1950s, but come on. Let's be real here, okay? What about compassionate type of engineering? What about engineering that cares? What about engineering with a human face? That is more attractive to women than men. I think engineering really has an issue of marketing itself. If it needs something, it's really getting a good marketing company and marketing itself. Problems are there. Engineering for the developing world, you bet you. 5 billion people here that you need to help. 1.2 billion people do not have clean water. 1.2 billion people do not have sanitation. 2.4 billion, I'm sorry. 29,000 children die every day for reasons that are purely preventable. 1.6 billion people do not have electricity. 3 billion people have never placed a phone call. 4.2 billion people are unable to read. Welcome to planet Earth 2008. Welcome to the 21st century, folks. And among all the people who suffer the most, I can tell you that the children are suffering the most. And the women. There are about 2.2 billion children in the world. Half of them live in extreme deprivation and in poverty. 29,000 children die every day for reasons that are purely preventable. Are you comfortable with those numbers? Is there something wrong here about the human species that is in such denial, and denial of denial, that we don't care? The statement I'm going to make here is not meant to be political. I do believe in defense, and there are some times where defense is necessary. For instance, in Afghanistan, I do believe that we need to be there. In the world today, in 2007, in the entire world, we spend $1 trillion, $1,054 billion exactly on weapons in the world. And if you divide that by 365 days, by 24 hours, 60 minutes, and 60 seconds, you end up with $31,000 a second. We, citizens of planet Earth, with our major institutions, political, religious, economic, educational, are willing to accept, because it's we, not those folks in Washington, D.C., or in Paris, or whatever you in Moscow, we are willing to accept that it's okay to spend $31,000 a second on weapons, and at the same time, it's okay to have 29,000 children dying every day for reasons that are purely preventable. That, my friends, is unacceptable. We need to stand up and call for social justice in the name of compassion, in the name of equity, and fight the dark side that is on our planet. Abuse of children, prostitution, poverty. We cannot, this is not acceptable. We need to stand up and be the change that we want to see in the world. They, the political folks, are not going to do it for us. Whether you vote Republican or Democrat, I don't care. We are the change that we want to see in the world. Each one of us can be an agent of change. Each one of us can make the world a better place in our own way. And that's another message that I want to convey in the world. I've seen children die in front of me. I can tell you it's not a pretty picture. I remember that child in Mali, big eyes and big belly. And I look into the eyes of that child and look into the eyes of that woman, the mother there. I could see the eyes of God in there. To me, the eyes of God are not always in the churches on Sundays, in the temples on Saturdays, in the mosque on Fridays. They are out there in a small village of the world where Jesus has been crucified over and over and over and over again. Over and over and over again. The same man has been crucified on the cross. Each time a child dies. Is it acceptable to you? No, of course not. Because if it's not acceptable on Friday, on Saturday, or on Sunday, depending on your religion, it's not acceptable on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. At all. Period. So I want you to think about it. As you go through this conference, on Sunday you're going back home, everybody's going to be excited. You hear some great lectures. You make some good friends. What are you going to do on Monday morning? Really, what are you going to do on Monday morning? Watch the paper, read the news, go to business as usual. If you do that, you might be part of the problem rather than part of the solution. I hate to say that. You've got to change your life. This is a conference that is changing your life. Think about it. And here's a quote there: if a free society cannot help the many who are poor, it cannot help the few who are rich. Take that very, very, very seriously. Read the report of the World Bank. I think it's a 2007 report on youth and development. It says in there that in 2020, we can expect in North Africa and the Middle East 100 million young people between the age of 18 and 25 without a job. Now, 0.00001% of that, that's still a large number of people who could join Al-Qaeda, who could join other groups there that are on the dark side of the soul. And believe me, we cannot afford that. None of us can afford it. And I will show you some initiatives that I'm doing in Palestine right now where we push this idea of vocational training, vocational training, vocational training, not creating more master's degrees and PhDs and people with BS degrees and advanced degrees. you want is essentially to take those young people and get them on their feet, proud of themselves, with a skill so that they can be positive contributors to society rather than negative contributors to society. Each one of us has an obligation to do that regardless of religion. Regardless of religion. The problems that we face today are global. They cut across religions. They cut across societies, and we need to address it at a global level. Another issue that obviously we need to worry about is population growth. 2 billion extra people in the world expected over the next 20 years. 97% of that will be in a developing world. Huge demand essentially for the engineering profession. But again, this is not engineering as usual. It is engineering essentially with essentially a different type of paradigm. Here's the kind of engineering that I'm talking about. These are engineering structures for all practical purposes. These are places that, well, for quite a few hundred people there, if you look at that shanty town there, people are born there, work there, are raised there, die there. They drink the water maybe from that ditch there and dispose the water, the waste in the same ditch, so that water is used by the next people. That to me that's engineering. How do we address problems like that? How do we address problems of water? The top left corner there, I don't have a pointer, I'm sorry. Top left corner is a project we did in Mali years back. The water that you see there in that well is murky, it's green, it has feces in there, it has urine in there, and that was the main source of water for that village. In that village, half of the children died by the age of 5. In fact, they did not even name their kids until the age of 6. And that's just one village among many, many other villages. That's kind of engineering that I'm talking about. See, when I came back from Belize there, it really changed my life. It really changed my life like I never thought about. For me, I stopped doing large-scale type of engineering, and I decided that, well, I'm going to do small-scale engineering instead. And essentially bring young people into the equation there so that they can themselves essentially practice engineering for the developing world. It was a midlife awakening, not a midlife crisis. Some people, men tend to have midlife crisis. For me, I did not change job, I did not change wife, I did not change car. I just changed, some men go through that, and some men go through all 3 of them, which is terrible. And they get a new wife, and guess what? The new wife runs away with the car and the house and so on. So they never win, and then start all over again. So it's fascinating. Human species is fascinating species. So I did not do that, and instead really decided that I would commit myself to making the world a better place in my own way, obviously, and trying to entice as many young people to do the same. But here's the world at night there. Obviously, it's a compounded picture of the world at night. I can put my finger anywhere in Africa on the dark side there. I can tell you that at that place, there's probably a child who cannot read, a child who does not have access to clean water, a child who does not have access to electricity, who cannot do his homework or her homework. It's wasted potential. There's huge amount of potential there for change. And these are the people essentially that I'm addressing right now. These are the people who could use this kind of engineering that I'm talking about. So there's a huge demand there. So the way I look at it is, for me, developing a new generation of engineers for the 21st century. As I mentioned earlier, engineers tend to be seen as providers of technical solutions. I mean, the concept of a nerdy engineer is not too far off. It's true that there's a bunch of nerdy engineers out there, but it's changing for the better. We have fewer and fewer pens on our left pocket, and we dress a little bit better than 50 years ago. So, but our goal is really to create a new generation of engineers who are facilitators of sustainable development, social and economic change, capacity building, and appropriate technology. Engineers are social entrepreneurs, community builders, and peacemakers. Let me say a few words about some initiatives that I'm doing right now with colleagues in the Middle East. I studied Engineers Without Borders USA in 2001, and in 2002, several of us started Engineers Without Borders International, which is a network of 39 countries now, groups that are essentially interacting and creating synergy between our groups. Recently, we have EWB Israel that was created and EWB Palestine that was created. and Egypt and Jordan also in that region of the world. There are several initiatives that are being done. One of them is the construction of a house in Bethlehem. We got some funding for that. That house will be built by young Palestinians and young Israelis together. And that house will showcase some renewable energy, green design, solar energy, and also geothermal closed-loop systems. And it's all going to be built essentially by members, young engineers from Israel and Palestine. Another initiative that we are doing is a meeting in Cyprus next year, where we're going to bring to the table Jordan, Israel, Palestine, Egypt, and a few other groups as well, to talk about collaboration at the regional level, things that are common to the region in terms of engineering, like refugee camps, for instance, Palestinian refugee camps or Iraqi refugee camps. How do you design refugee camp? What's the engineering of refugee camps? What's the engineering in emergencies? What's the engineering in disasters? That's an area of engineering that even doesn't exist. In fact, next year I'm going to Princeton for 1 year, and they asked me to start a new program called Engineering in Disasters and Emergencies. This is rapid response type of engineering. Tomorrow morning, you have 1 million people crossing the border here, and they all want water, energy, sanitation. They're going to poop everywhere, dispose waste everywhere. They want food, they want safety, and you've got to respond you have to design systems by tomorrow morning. That's rapid response type of engineering, ER type of engineering, if you want to call it. And that requires a different dimension of engineering that we even can think of. Okay, so that's one thing in the Palestine. And then there's another initiative called the Abraham Path Initiative. Abraham Path Initiative was started by a group by Bill Urey from Harvard. The office is in Boulder. Abraham, you know he traveled all over the place, actually, in the Middle East. So what this group is doing essentially is to identify his path, or at least the path that we think that he followed. And it's kind of the Appalachian Trail, if you want to put it that way. Spiritual Appalachian Trail, where people essentially will walk the path, and some people have walked the path already. The idea here is that for each one of our Engineers Without Borders groups is to adopt a section of that path. EWB Jordan will take the section of the path that is in Jordan, EWB Israel in Israel, EWB Palestine, and so on, and people will be able to walk the path from country to country. Role of engineers here, our engineers will construct small huts for pilgrims. They will construct solar panels, water filtration systems, things that pilgrims will need along the path, because in that neck of the woods, it is hot, and water is very difficult to get. So here's a good example where we combine the sacred with engineering. This is beautiful. 3 religions here with the same God, working together along the same path. That's beautiful. Peace has to come out of it. And as part of my life, I want to make sure that this Abraham Path Initiative essentially takes off. Some people have walked the path from all the way from Turkey, all the way down via Egypt to Hebron in Palestine. Beautiful. It's feasible, and we need as much help as possible. So if you're interested in the Abraham Path Initiative, let me know. That's something we're going to discuss more in April in Cyprus, where we are going to coordinate our efforts. So yes, we can bring peace into the world. And it seems to me, politicians have tried to bring peace into the Middle East. They failed. Economists tried to bring peace into the Middle East. They failed. For us engineers, we tend to be at the bottom of the food chain anyway. If we fail or not, nobody will care. But I do believe that we will win. We will not just win. We will succeed. Let's put it that way, one way or the other. All the components are in place, and I don't see why it would not succeed. Okay? So the core of this type of engineering is called appropriate and sustainable technology. It's small-scale type of technology, and I know that Paul Pollack tonight will talk more about it, so I don't want to expand on that. But you cannot use big technology to solve small problems, like taking a big sledgehammer to put a tiny nail. Essentially, you need the right tool for the right type of problem. So the kind of technology that we talk about was presented by Schumacher. If there's one book you should read, it's called Small is Beautiful, that was written in 1970 by E.F. Schumacher. Young people don't even know that. Older people probably know about it. It's called Small is Beautiful. Read it and then do something about poverty. But read it first, okay, before you do any good or any harm in a developing world. But it talks about small-scale type of engineering. It can be high-tech or low-tech. It's essentially, it's kind of a small type of technology that cares. that is designed for the people, that is understood by the people, that can be fixed by the people, and that is sustainable. Sustainable, that's very important. We're talking about appropriate and sustainable technology, both. Something can be appropriate to us and not be sustainable, and something can be sustainable and not be appropriate. The two work hand in hand. Here's a quote that best summarizes my lecture: find out what people do and help them do it better. Memorize it. Have it run in your blood there. Because if you don't do that, you are into serious failure at the local level. You're going to do more harm than good. Be careful about not doing any harm into a community. There's talent at the local level. There's a culture there in place. There's an environment in place. Yes, it's fantastic to be excited to help other people, but you need to work in partnership with other people. You need to build on what they do best and do it better. That's successful, sustainable community development. That's the kind of stuff I teach this semester, and I tell my students, if I have to summarize the entire semester into 2 quotes, that will be the first one, and the second one I will show it to you later on. Find what people do best and teach them to do it better. That's successful, sustainable community development. Here's some example of technologies, appropriate technology. That's one essentially that we are doing in Peru. It's a transmission tower that brings essentially information to little children or people in that lodge on the top right corner. And the teacher or the medical doctor is in Iquitos, 50 kilometers away. So there's essentially direct communication between teachers, doctors, and students and patients 50 kilometers away using computers. Total cost of that system was $15,000. So it's telemedicine, teleeducation. That's a field that is fast growing in the world. Fast growing in the world. That's a fantastic high-tech type of technology that can be appropriate and sustainable for certain communities around the world. We are doing a similar system in Nepal. Another type of technology that I'm proud of is in Afghanistan. I'm doing some work in Afghanistan in 2 areas. One, through a contract for USAID to train the trainers at Kabul University and Kabul Polytechnic University. Colleagues like you and me who are over there about 20 years behind, essentially. They know statics and dynamics and strengths and materials and everything, but they are essentially not up to date with the recent advances in engineering. So that's one thing I'm doing there. On the side there, I studied the business with some colleagues there, with some Afghan people. The problem in Afghanistan is that there's no wood, period. The weather is like Boulder, Colorado, 6,000 feet, very cold in the winter, very hot in the summer, semi-arid. And the Taliban and the Russians essentially destroyed all the trees. So right now, people don't have wood. Wood comes from Pakistan and extremely expensive. So what we did there was to create a business using waste. It's called fuel briquettes. Fuel briquettes, I came across the gentleman there. His name is Sanu Kaji in Nepal. He has been very successful at starting social entrepreneurs in Nepal there. And essentially what you take in this case is that you take waste paper, cardboard, and sawdust, or leaves, anything that burns except plastic. You crush it, you make a paste. There's a little bit of recipe there. It's like cooking there. And you put it into a machine there, which is also a business by itself. You compress it, water comes out of that PVC tube, and I don't have a pointer, so I cannot show you. And then the briquette comes out, the bottom left. And that briquette, essentially, that Sanu Kaji is holding there, will burn for about half an hour. So that's the workshop that we conducted in March. In July, went back to Kabul. Now the business is in place. Business is in place. We hired children. 20 children, the boys that you see there on the left, used to be involved in a prostitution ring 2 months ago, a block away from where the business is starting. We took them out of the prostitution ring using the help of UNICEF. They are making those briquettes in the morning, and in the afternoon, they are taking classes. Basic education, 5th grade education. But these are young men who now have smiles on their face, who are proud of themselves, and we took them out of hell, literally, and brought them into a better situation. We pay them $50 a month, and we also have handicapped young men in their 20s there who are the leaders. One of them is in charge of the collection of the waste. One of them is in charge of making the briquettes. One of them is in charge of selling the briquettes. And we have 5 essentially handicapped young men who are doing that. Those few briquettes there, we were able to reduce the price of bread in one bakery by 30% during the summer. Instead of 10 Afghanis per loaf of bread, and those loaves of bread on the right there, I saw them come live right in front of me as that woman put the dough and used 4 kilos of briquettes in there. Changed completely the community using trash. And more importantly, it's taking those young men out of hell, literally, and bring them and giving them hope. For your information, there are 60,000 children in Kabul living in the streets of Kabul every day. And that number is increasing. A lot of them are involved in begging. A lot of them are involved in prostitution. When I saw that, when I look at those little kids there, we've got to do something about it. Looking for God, looking for the divine, look into the eyes of those children. That's where you will find the divine there. Not for me, it's not necessarily on Sunday morning or on Friday or on Saturday, depending on your religion. To me, it's in the field and looking into the people at the bottom of the pyramid who need our help. They're crying for help. You want to be part of that program? Hey, come, send me an email, talk to me after the talk. There are 60,000 children, okay? We just took 20 of them. And that's the funding that I have for essentially 1 year. There's plenty of funding, by the way, out there. Plenty, more money than you can think of. The question is, you need to find it. It's some marketing that is involved in there. You need to shake hands. It's relationship, US dollars. That's how it works. You develop relationship. Don't go into a potential donor and say, hey, give me money. No, you build up relationship. You show what you can do, and then sooner or later, people will give you funding. Money is not even an issue here. Don't even worry about money. I ask, and it comes to me for whatever reason. So Engineers Without Borders, USA, there we have 13,000 members here, 295 chapters, 365 projects in 48 countries. We grew like that over a period of 7 years. We're essentially increasing at 50% per year. We have 25 people on staff. 25 people on staff. Our budget is about $4 million a year. That gives you an idea. Again, 6 years ago, I was by myself, okay? Now we have 25 people on staff. And we have like 3 people on projects, 2 people on development, 3 people on marketing. If you want to really do it seriously, you've got to do it seriously. You've got to hire a team. And that team has to be a team, an excellent team, an A team, right? In Engineers Without Borders, we have 25 people on staff. 2 of them are men and 23 are women. Give you an idea, okay? I feel sorry for those 2 guys at times, but that's okay. But 25 of them total, essentially. Our projects consist of, out of our members, 13,000 members, we have half of them are student members, half of them are professional members. You want to do engineering, you better surround yourself by people who know about engineering. Putting a well at the middle of Africa is an engineering problem. Designing a good well that does not create problems later on, that does not create harm, is an engineering problem. And last time someone called me and said, oh, we are a bunch of neighbors and we found $5,000 for you to drill a well in Africa. Excuse me? How do you know it's $5,000 for a well? I can tell you that there are some places where a well has to go to a few hundred feet and it's going to be $20,000, and cases where you can do it for $1,000, depending on where you are. A well is not the end in itself. Once you create a well, so what? So what? You have water, more water, and then you're going to get what? Wastewater. Believe me, I can show you some examples where all of a sudden you have more wastewater and you have more mosquitoes carrying malaria after the well than before. You better think about that stuff beforehand as you design your entire project. So when you do engineering, please, if you're not an engineer, surround yourself by people who know about it. Please don't go into a village and say, oh, we found $5,000, we'll give you a well. That is, actually you can do more harm than good. Okay? We have a lot of stakeholders involved in our projects, professional chapters, student chapters, major professional organizations like American Society of Mechanical Engineers, American Society of Civil Engineers, and obviously in-country stakeholders. You need NGOs on the ground who are going to follow up on your work. In our case, we find some local EWB chapters there, EWB Rwanda, EWB Nepal, what have you, they're all working with us. Some example of projects. This is a project in Mauritania several years ago. I need to finish a little bit soon here, so you can ask me questions if you want. A project in Mauritania where we designed a pump, essentially using solar panels. Total cost of the project was $9,000, and that's middle of the Sahara there. 8 solar panels driving a photovoltaic pump. That was done in partnership with NREL, National Renewable Energy Lab. Project in Nepal where the students were installed a series of photovoltaic computers. They bought the system in Kathmandu, and the kids there on bottom right are looking at the monitor of the computer. The solar panels are used for teaching, but they also provide electricity for the community. Total cost of this project was $4,000, and that included 2 round-trip airline tickets to Kathmandu. So we're talking about small-scale type of engineering, low cost, but it's engineering nevertheless. There's design involved. When we send a team, for instance, doing spring break or during the summer break, that team has worked on that entire project for 8 months or 9 months. They go through all the phases from the concept to the problem concept design, implementation, and monitoring. If you don't implement those phases into your project, you are doomed to fail. The developing world is littered with equipment that does not work. Let me tell you something to the young people. You want to be rich overnight? I'm going to give you a secret. Learn how to fix a water pump, a hand pump. You can go to, there's a place here in Texas for $400 for 1 week. They will teach you, I think it's water for...
Living water in Houston.
Oh, in Houston, right?
Living water.
Living water. Yeah, for $400 there, you can know how to fix a pump and sell your services to the World Bank, United Nations, USAID, and all the NGOs. You will be rich, guaranteed, overnight. And once you're done with water pumps, learn how to install a successful solar PV system. You will be rich next night. So there's plenty of work there. Again, in case you want to be rich overnight, okay? Other projects, this is a project in Nepal there that we're dealing with latrine building and also protection of water springs, bottom right there. Water is extremely contaminated. The top right here shows how we communicate with local people. This is a patch test on the right there. Essentially, if you put the dirty water on it, it leaves some dark spots, and essentially it tells the people that the water is contaminated with viruses and bacteria. Well, here, instead of giving the people a huge progress report that nobody is going to read because most people don't know how to write and read there, we give them a drawing. And it says, if the cow poops in the water, and if you poop in the water, and you see those tiny dots there, you don't drink the water. That's the message. Very often, that's how it works. And believe me, this kind of diagram is more successful than writing a huge progress report with an executive summary that nobody reads about. Sorry, but the developing world does not need your fancy technical publications, does not need your fancy technical reports. It needs compassion, and compassion in action. Another one in Rwanda, there we use solar panels essentially to provide electricity for a clinic at the top and for another clinic at the bottom. 3 chapters of Engineers Without Borders took that project. EWB, NASA, Houston Johnson Space Center. The older man there on that picture is an astronaut who was in space in April, carried the Engineers Without Borders T-shirt in space. Now we're going to have Engineers Without Borders on Mars or on the moon pretty soon. And also Engineers Without Borders Boulder and Engineers Without Borders Wisconsin. As I mentioned to you, I'm almost done. The key to really changing the world is really vocational training. Vocational training is something we need to take extremely seriously. That is not sexy in any country in the world. Most people say, I want to send my kids to college. They end up, after 4 years of boot camp, they don't get a job, but that's not the issue there, right? Well, maybe those kids could have been better carpenters and car mechanics or plumbers and so on. A plumber can make more money than you and me today per hour. $90 an hour, that's not too bad. I don't know of too many engineers who have the same kind of skill and we can do that. In the developing world, this is a no-brainer here. Creating vocational training. Here, the pictures there at the top were taken in Rwanda, in a small vocational school there for $300 per year. That includes room and board, clothing, food, and so on. That young man there can go to school and learn a skill. So for $600 over a period of 2 years, you can take someone who doesn't know how to write and read and bring that person back on his feet or her feet, and that person is a positive contributor to society. You don't do that with a BS degree and an MS degree and so on, or PhD. I think the world has too many PhDs anyway. Right? That's, to me, it's one of the highest priorities, creating vocational training at the local level, creating skills. Those young men may later on want to become technicians and engineers, but you need to find first a foundation. You need a safety net so they can always come back and be essentially and make a living. The challenge that I see there in conclusion, I think that the challenge is humongous. I mentioned about Engineers Without Borders or Doctors Without Borders and so on. In many countries in the world, it's borders without engineers, borders without doctors, borders without nurses, borders without teachers. You cannot help a community if you don't have the capacity on the ground, the educational capacity. So at the same time as you build wells, PV panels, better mechanical system or civil systems whatsoever, you need to build the educational infrastructure. Because by the time you leave there, you need to have some people who can maintain and take care of the equipment that you have brought over. That's part of the equation. The two go hand in hand. So Engineers Without Borders, borders without engineers, we need to create more technicians and scientists. Look at that, 1 for every 10,000 people in Africa compared to 2 to 5 for 1,000 in Europe and the United States. You cannot have a country getting back on its feet if it doesn't have the know-how at different levels, PhD, MS, technicians, vocational training. That's impossible. You can bring as many pumps as you want there, it will be completely useless because nobody knows how to fix them. So we need education of engineers, essentially, and scientists who have the skills and tools to address global world issues. We live in a globalized world, so therefore we need some globalized solutions. Our way of educating engineering today is completely obsolete. We have done a great job at doing it for 150 years. It's completely obsolete. How do you, again, address engineering for the developing world? It requires a completely different mindset, and we need to reinvent engineering. We also need system thinkers. Our type of engineering, the way we teach engineering today, is linear thinking. Problem, cause, effect, cause, effect, cause, effect. You know, when I bring a team to a village there, I don't send the mechanical engineers here, the civil engineers there, the electrical engineers here, the chemical engineers here, and the aerospace engineers up there. I don't do that. The problems are all over the place. We don't teach this kind of approach in engineering education today. It's system thinking, and part of our program at the University of Colorado is really to emphasize system thinking. What are the greatest challenges there? Well, they can best be summarized by 8 Millennium Development Goals that the United Nations came up in 2000. All of us have an obligation to contribute to those 8 Millennium Development Goals. Reducing extreme poverty, achieving universal primary education, promoting gender equality and empowering women, reducing child mortality, improving maternal health, combating malaria, HIV/AIDS, and other diseases, ensuring environmental sustainability, and developing a global partnership. These are 8 major goals. I was at the NAE, National Academy of Engineering, not a long time ago. They were talking about 14 big challenges for the engineering profession. That was not included. So they were talking about challenges essentially for 1 billion rich people. What about the other 5 billion people? What are the challenges? I think the challenges are here, and those challenges need to be addressed by engineering profession and also in partnership with other disciplines such as health, the medical profession, and also the business profession. In conclusion, I hear a quote from Albert Einstein and also give you the websites for the program at the University of Colorado on the left and EWB USA on the right. The significant problems we face cannot be solved by the same level of thinking that created them. Take that. That's the second statement I tell my students about. Tell them at the end, my class in the fall can be summarized into 2 statements. Find out what people do best and teach them how to do it better. That's the first one. And that's the second one. The significant problems we face cannot be solved by the same level of thinking that created them. We need a new mindset, a completely different mindset in a way as we are approaching poverty. Our institutions, our major institutions, whether they are political, religious, economic, financial, they are broke. They don't have a soul in them. They are broke, completely broke, and we are seeing right now, financial institutions really falling apart in front of us. Hey, can you have something that is driven by greed and fear and violence forever? Impossible, as far as my God is concerned. Impossible. It cannot last. The system has to collapse, and a new phoenix will come out of it, but that's the way the universe is working. Our systems are completely broke, spiritually broke. There's no soul. That's why I think that's the title of my book, Engineering with Soul. We need to bring back soul into the classroom, soul into our workplace, soul into our churches, temples, and synagogues, soul into the White House, soul into our educational system and political system. If we don't do that, we're in serious trouble, folks. And each one of us has to contribute to bringing soul into ourselves first and into the communities that we interact with afterwards. It starts with each one of us. And I want to finish my presentation with this slide and a quote from Gandhi. Gandhi said, you need to be the change that you want to see in the world. Nobody else is going to do it for you. As I mentioned to you, major institutions are broke, completely broke. The top is congested, the top is constipated. The transformation has to be from the bottom up, i.e. you and me, each one of us. Each one of us has a skill, each one of us has a mission statement. We were born with that mission statement, given to us by the divine at birth. We better fulfill that mission statement. Being alive is a gift, and that gift needs to be given to others, as far as I'm concerned. A gift is not meant to be kept in your own pocket. It has to be shared. It has to be what drives you every day. How are you going to make the world a better place? I ask my students very often to sit down and say, hey, write your mission statement. Go over a cup of coffee, a cup of tea at Starbucks or whatever you, and sit down and write your mission statement. Feel free to destroy it tomorrow. Change it as you see fit, but if you don't have a mission statement, we're in a business school. I don't know of too many companies that don't have a mission statements out there. If you don't have a mission statement, you may be a loose cannonball that will be floating all over the desert there and not doing anything. We don't want 6 billion people on our planet without a mission statement. That's too dangerous. So what's your mission statement? You may want to reflect on that as you go back on Monday to your workplaces. What's your mission statement? What are you here for? What's your gift? What's that unique gift that the divine gave you at birth that you need to express and that you need to share with 6 billion people, not just with your family and your neighbors and your friends, with 6 billion people? To me, I think I've found my mission statement. In speaking, like I speak, in doing work in all sorts of countries there, I travel more than I ever thought of, and I find so much compassion there, out there. So many good people out there. It's just beautiful there. It's really, I want to thank all the people that I have interacted with in the developing world and the developed world, because they have made me a better friend, a better husband, a better human being, essentially, than ever before, than 10 years before, 5 years before. And I want to finish my presentation with those smiles, because after all, that's what it's all about. You want to look at the divine, you want to look at what the divine looks like. Look at those smiles. That little girl in Peru there, telemedicine project, look at her smile. Look at the smiles of the children on the right there in Nepal. They're not going to run after you with an AK-47, I can guarantee you that. Bringing smiles there is cheaper than spending $31,000 a second on weapons. And it's better for the planet. It's not good for the economy of some countries that are sending those weapons, but it's better for the planet. It's along the line of what God wants us to do. Bring smiles. Each time I go to a community, I hear Jesus saying, you know, I came here to give you life. Follow me. Action and compassion. Don't sit down under the Buddha tree and say, Om all day long. Okay, fine, do that for a few minutes, but walk the talk. Get up, do something about it. Make this world a better place. That's all, to me, what it is, that gift that God gave me at birth. In Rwanda, the bottom right there, those 4 boys that were involved in the prostitution ring. They came from hell. And now they have a smile on their face. My goal is to bring 60,000 of them out of that hell and give them a job and be agents of peace and positive contributors to their society. One of them might be an Einstein. One of them might be a great teacher. One of them might be a great nurse. We need to give people a chance to step up and get out of poverty, regardless of religion. What I've learned essentially, especially with the Abraham Path Initiative and the work in the Middle East, it's amazing how much compassion there is in all the religions in the world. There's also a lot of terror and fear in many religions in the world, but we have something in common. So I will invite you in a few years from now to walk the path with me on the Abraham Path. That would be fantastic. Imagine this 300 people walking the path there and being able to connect their phones into a solar panel that was designed by engineers, getting clean water, creating jobs along the path for the people who live along the path. That's a vision that I have there. So thank you. Remember the mission statement? Do it by Monday morning. That's your assignment. I'm a teacher, after all. Thank you.
Dr. Amadei, we really do thank you for your passion. We thank you for your encouragement. We thank you for the challenge that we have in front of us, and also this morning, the vision that one person can really make a difference, and with a mission statement. And with that, we'll open it up to some questions this morning. We have a few minutes before we need to break. So, any questions?
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. And we have a lot of budding engineers in the back of the room who have their careers in front of them. But I'm going to ask something more.
Want to use the microphone? Want to come here? I'll share the microphone with you.
There is
nice
one,
speaker.
but I don't know what it is.
Well, thank you. I see that at the back of the room you have a large number of budding engineers who are about to begin their careers, and I'm sure this is very inspiring for them. But I'm going to ask something more from a selfish standpoint: is what can those of us who have a few gray hairs and are further along in our careers, how can we help in this endeavor?
Excellent. As I mentioned to you, 13,000 members on our organization. Half of them are professional engineers. We have 295 chapters, 200 student chapters, and 95 professional chapters. So you can join, for instance, here in the Denver, Boulder area. There are 2 professional chapters in Denver and Boulder. Professional chapters usually take larger projects. They take small dams, small bridges, and so on, whereas student chapters take smaller projects. So many opportunities. We are looking for retired engineers. Hey, you have 30, 40 years of experience. We want that experience. What about sitting down, teaching, being a mentor to our students, teaching them the ropes, essentially, going to the field with the students? This is a fantastic opportunity for you to give something back. If you are bored at work, at home because you're retired, I have a solution for you.
Any other
Sounds
questions?
like Dr. Laura. Thank you.